My name is Gemma Bennett, and I was 28 years old when my own mother looked me in the eye and told me she had given my dead father's entire legacy to a boy she had known for less than a year. The custom mahogany watch winder sat on the heavy oak desk in my father's old study. For as long as I could remember, it had been the heartbeat of this room, a humming, precise piece of engineering that cradled his vintage Patek Philippe and Audemars Piguet, $400,000 of curated time. Now the velvet-lined slots were bare. The slow rhythmic rotation of the winder turned empty air. My mother Cynthia leaned against the doorframe holding a gin martini. An olive rested against the crystal rim. She took a slow sip and told me she gave them to Trevor, her new husband's 24-year-old son. A kid whose only notable achievement in Las Vegas was crashing a leased BMW on the Strip and dodging the DUI. I stood in the center of the study. The faint familiar scent of cedar and my father's signature vetiver cologne still clung to the leather armchair. I asked her where the watches were, and my voice came out flat, a stark contrast to the thrumming pulse in my throat. She waved her free hand, dismissing the theft like a stray receipt. She said I needed to be reasonable. She said I sat behind a computer all day hunting for whatever it is security people hunt for. She told me I had no use for men's jewelry. Trevor, on the other hand, was trying to break into commercial real estate down in Summerlin. In this town, she said, a man needs to look like a man of means to get a seat at the table. She smiled and added that my father would understand. He would not. My father Thomas despised her new husband Greg and his flashy, hollow existence. He would have loathed Trevor. Those watches were a meticulously selected asset portfolio promised to me as a foundational safety net. And my own blood had just handed it away. She thought I had nothing to say. She thought I was weak. She thought wrong. Before I tell you how a simple digital alert triggered a chain of events that stripped my mother of her wealth and freedom, please take a moment to like and subscribe to Orange Vengeance. Let me know in the comments how old you are and where you are watching from right now. To understand why that empty box felt like a knife to the chest, I need to explain how things work in Nevada. In the high-rolling districts of Las Vegas, wealth is not just money, it is armor. A rare watch on a man's wrist commands a room before a single word is spoken. My father taught me to read that language. He also taught me that security is the only true luxury in a desert full of mirages. I am an information security analyst. When an intrusion occurs, you do not panic. You do not scream at the hacker. You lock the perimeter, trace the digital footprints, and prepare the countermeasure. My mother had just breached the perimeter. She handed a fortune to a fool, assuming the ledger was closed. I looked at the winder and then back to my mother. Crying or yelling in this house had never achieved anything beyond providing Cynthia with an audience for her martyrdom. I walked to the desk, reached out, and pressed the brass toggle switch. The motors spun down. The quiet in the room settled like falling dust. I closed the glass lid, trapping the scent of vetiver inside. I told her I had to get back to the office and stepped past her into the hallway. She called out that she would see me at Sunday brunch at the country club. Her tone was bright and victorious. I did not answer. I stepped out into the blinding Nevada sun and got into my car. Sunday morning arrived with sweltering heat. The country club was a sprawling oasis of manicured green lawns sitting in the middle of the Mojave Desert. I walked onto the shaded patio and found my mother, Greg, and Trevor already seated. Greg held court, talking loudly about blended families sharing the wealth. Then I saw it. Strapped to Trevor's wrist was my father's prized Rolex Daytona, the exact watch my father wore when he taught me how to read code. I knew every scratch on that bezel. Trevor carelessly banged his wrist against the marble table as he reached for a mimosa. The metal clacked against the stone. My chest tightened, but my face remained still. He bragged to a passing waiter about how Cynthia had hooked him up with some serious vintage hardware. Greg raised his glass and offered a toast to new beginnings. I smiled. I picked up my fork and ate my meal. I played the part of the defeated daughter flawlessly. But under the table, I had my phone in my hand. When Trevor adjusted his cuffs, I angled my camera and took a high-resolution photo of the watch, capturing the serial number in the reflection of a polished silver spoon resting on the table. The anger inside me burned cold and clear. They had no idea they were sitting across from someone who dismantles digital thieves for a living. The trap was set. My name is Gemma Bennett, and I was 28 years old when my own mother looked me in the eye and told me she had given my dead father's entire legacy to a boy she had known for less than a year. The custom mahogany watchwinder sat on the heavy oak desk in my father's old study. For as long as I could remember, it had been the heartbeat of this room. A humming, precise piece of engineering that cradled his vintage Patek Philippe and Audemar's Piguet. $400,000 of curated time. Now the velvet-lined slots were bare. The slow, rhythmic rotation of the winder turned empty air. My mother Cynthia leaned against the doorframe holding a gin martini. An olive rested against the crystal rim. She took a slow sip and told me she gave them to Trevor, her new husband's 24-year-old son. A kid whose only notable achievement in Las Vegas was crashing a leased BMW on the strip and dodging the DUI. I stood in the center of the study. The faint familiar scent of cedar and my father's signature vetiver cologne still clung to the leather armchair. I asked her where the watches were and my voice came out flat, a stark contrast to the thrumming pulse in my throat. She waved her free hand, dismissing the theft like a stray receipt. She said I needed to be reasonable. She said I sat behind a computer all day, hunting for whatever it is security people hunt for. She told me I had no use for men's jewelry. Trevor, on the other hand, was trying to break into commercial real estate down in Summerlin. In this town, she said, a man needs to look like a man of means to get a seat at the table. She smiled and added that my father would understand. He would not. My father, Thomas, despised her new husband, Greg, and his flashy, hollow existence. He would have loathed Trevor. Those watches were a meticulously selected asset portfolio promised to me as a foundational safety net, and my own blood had just handed it away. She thought I had nothing to say. She thought I was weak. She thought wrong. Before I tell you how a simple digital alert triggered a chain of events that stripped my mother of her wealth and freedom, please take a moment to like and subscribe to Orange Vengeance. Let me know in the comments how old you are and where you are watching from right now. To understand why that empty box felt like a knife to the chest, I need to explain how things work in Nevada. In the high-rolling districts of Las Vegas, wealth is not just money, it is armor. A rare watch on a man's wrist commands a room before a single word is spoken. My father taught me to read that language. He also taught me that security is the only true luxury in a desert full of mirages. I am an information security analyst. When an intrusion occurs, you do not panic. You do not scream at the hacker. You lock the perimeter, trace the digital footprints, and prepare the countermeasure. My mother had just breached the perimeter. She handed a fortune to a fool, assuming the ledger was closed. I looked at the winder and then back to my mother. Crying or yelling in this house had never achieved anything beyond providing Cynthia with an audience for her martyrdom. I walked to the desk, reached out, and pressed the brass toggle switch. The motors spun down. The quiet in the room settled like falling dust. I closed the glass lid, trapping the scent of vetiver inside. I told her I had to get back to the office and stepped past her into the hallway. She called out that she would see me at Sunday brunch at the country club. Her tone was bright and victorious. I did not answer. I stepped out into the blinding Nevada sun and got into my car. Sunday morning arrived with sweltering heat. The country club was a sprawling oasis of manicured green lawns sitting in the middle of the Mojave Desert. I walked onto the shaded patio and found my mother, Greg, and Trevor already seated. Greg held court, talking loudly about blended families sharing the wealth. Then I saw it. Strapped to Trevor's wrist was my father's prized Rolex Daytona. The exact watch my father wore when he taught me how to read code. I knew every scratch on that bezel. Trevor carelessly banged his wrist against the marble table as he reached for a mimosa. The metal clacked against the stone. My chest tightened, but my face remained still. He bragged to a passing waiter about how Cynthia had hooked him up with some serious vintage hardware. Greg raised his glass and offered a toast to new beginnings. I smiled. I picked up my fork and ate my meal. I played the part of the defeated daughter flawlessly. But under the table, I had my phone in my hand. When Trevor adjusted his cuffs, I angled my camera and took a high-resolution photo of the watch, capturing the serial number in the reflection of a polished silver spoon resting on the table. The anger inside me burned cold and clear. They had no idea they were sitting across from someone who dismantles digital thieves for a living. The trap was set. The air conditioning in my downtown apartment hummed a steady low note. I closed the front door, shutting out the blistering afternoon heat and the memory of that country club patio. The space inside was dark and quiet. Blackout shades covered the floor-to-ceiling windows, protecting the room from the relentless desert glare. My workspace occupied the far wall, featuring 3 curved monitors suspended above a glass desk. I did not throw my keys. I did not pace the floor. I sat down in my ergonomic chair and woke the system from sleep mode. Information security requires a specific mindset. You do not let anger guide your fingers across the keyboard. Emotion clouds judgment and creates blind spots. You rely on data. You look for the open port, the unsecured server, the careless mistake the adversary left behind. My mother believed she had secured her position. She thought changing a few passwords would leave me wandering in the dark. I opened a secure browser and navigated to the client portal for the wealth management firm handling my father's liquid assets. I entered my credentials and pressed enter. A red banner materialized across the top of the screen indicating unauthorized access. My account privileges had been revoked. 2 weeks prior, I had asked Cynthia why my login was failing. She played the role of the overwhelmed widow beautifully. She claimed it was a simple administrative delay. She said the bank was updating their security protocols and the estate executor accounts were temporarily frozen during the transition. She promised to call the wealth manager and sort it out. It was a calculated lie designed to buy her time. She was building a digital wall to keep me blind while she emptied the vault. But a wall is only effective if the intruder plays by the rules. I did not need the banking portal to see the structural damage she was causing. In a city like Las Vegas, wealth leaves a distinct paper trail. Real estate transactions, legal disputes, and corporate registrations are tethered to public databases. If you know how to format the query, the city will tell you all of its secrets. I opened a terminal window and began pulling records from the Clark County databases. I bypassed the standard web interface using a command line script to scrape property deeds and civil filings. I cross-referenced those results with metadata harvested from ordinary emails my mother had sent me over the past year. Holiday newsletters, recipes, country club event invitations. Every digital interaction carries a footprint containing IP addresses, timestamps, and location data. I isolated Greg's legal name and his associated limited liability companies in the search parameters. Greg worked tirelessly to project the image of a titan in commercial real estate. He wore custom Italian suits and drove a leased European sports car. But the desert economy is a ruthless ecosystem that does not tolerate pretenders for long. The screen populated with rows of parsed text. The reality of Greg's financial situation painted a very different picture than the one he sold at brunch. I scrolled through the findings. Foreclosure notices on 2 commercial lots in Henderson, a second mortgage taken out on their primary residence at a predatory interest rate, tax liens filed by the State Department of Taxation. Greg did not own an empire, he owned a sinking ship. Yet bad investments alone did not explain the sheer desperation required to steal a vintage watch collection valued at $400,000. People hide bad real estate deals every day. Stealing an inheritance requires a specific immediate threat. I needed the missing variable. I adjusted the search parameters, focusing strictly on civil court dockets, tying Greg's identity to local gaming institutions. The progress bar filled rapidly. A scanned document appeared on the right side of my monitor. It was a judgment filed by a major casino group on the Strip. The filing detailed unpaid casino markers. In the state of Nevada, a casino marker is not a casual promise to pay a debt. It is a formal line of credit regulated under the exact same statutes as writing a bad check. Defaulting on a marker is not a civil dispute. It is a felony offense prosecuted by the district attorney's bad check unit. Greg owed a six-figure sum to an entity that did not negotiate payment plans and did not care about his country club membership. He was facing imminent criminal charges and potential prison time if he did not produce a vast amount of liquid cash immediately. I leaned back in my chair and let the glow of the monitors wash over me. The pieces of the puzzle snapped together with terrifying clarity. The watches were never a sentimental gift to a new stepson. Cynthia was not trying to help Trevor look like a man of means to close real estate deals. Trevor was a mule. A 24-year-old kid with a loud mouth and a flashy persona is the perfect fence. He could walk into a high-end pawnbroker or a gray market dealer on the strip and liquidate a vintage Daytona for rapid cash without drawing immediate suspicion. If Greg attempted to sell the collection himself, his active liens and pending judgments would trigger alarms during any standard background check run by a reputable broker. Trevor was clean on paper. He was the designated proxy to turn my father's curated legacy into untraceable cash. The betrayal shifted in my mind, morphing from a simple familial slight into premeditated financial predation. This was a coordinated heist. My mother was using my inheritance as a life raft to save her new husband from a felony conviction. She calculated that I was too passive and too trusting to challenge her before the assets were fenced and the money vanished into the casino cages. I stared at the digital ledger of Greg's impending doom. They had locked me out of the trust, thinking that would neutralize my ability to interfere. They failed to realize that changing the locks on the front door does not stop the person who designed the security system. My father spent his life preparing for vulnerabilities. He never trusted anyone without verification. He understood that human nature is the weakest link in any security protocol. He always maintained a secondary layer of protection, a failsafe buried deep where opportunistic predators could not reach it. I picked up my phone from the glass desk, the screen illuminated, waiting for a command. I did not need to confront my mother in a shouting match. Shouting is for people who lack leverage. I needed the one man in Las Vegas who understood the exact architecture of my father's estate. The trap I was building required a flawless legal foundation to hold the perpetrators in place when the walls finally closed in. I opened my contacts and found the number for my father's estate attorney. It was time to initiate the countermeasure. Victor Vance operated his practice out of a low-slung brick building in downtown Las Vegas. It was a world away from the neon lights and towering glass resorts on the Strip. His office sat in the historic district where the original casino bosses used to settle their disputes with quiet conversations and binding handshakes. Victor was a relic of that era. He wore bespoke worsted wool suits regardless of the sweltering desert heat, and kept his desk clear of everything except a legal pad and a gold fountain pen. My father trusted him implicitly. They shared the same philosophy regarding human nature. They believed that while people are generally predictable, their capacity for greed is infinite. I parked my car in the shaded structure behind his building and walked through the heavy glass doors. The receptionist nodded, recognizing me immediately, and gestured toward the inner office. Victor sat behind his desk reviewing a printed brief. He looked up as I closed the heavy oak door behind me. I took a seat in the leather chair opposite him. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I told him about the empty window in the study. I told him about Sunday brunch at the country club and the Rolex Daytona dangling on Trevor's wrist. I detailed the digital footprints I traced the night before, mapping out Greg's sinking commercial real estate ventures and the looming felony casino markers hanging over his head. I presented the facts sequentially, the same way I would present a network vulnerability report to a corporate board of directors. I expected Victor to express concern, or perhaps reach for his telephone to draft a cease and desist order. I thought he might warn me about the complexities of suing family members. Instead, he set his fountain pen down on the green leather blotter, the corners of his mouth turned upward into a slow, cold smile. It was the expression of a chess grandmaster watching his opponent walk blindly into a forced mate. He steepled his fingers, resting his chin on his hands. He told me that my father possessed a remarkable talent for anticipating vulnerabilities long before they could be exploited. Thomas knew his health was failing, and he knew exactly who he had married. Cynthia had always been drawn to the illusion of status and the comfort of borrowed prestige. My father predicted that the moment he was gone, she would seek out someone who matched her appetite for display. He also predicted that whoever she found would eventually run out of other people's money and come looking for the easiest liquid assets to plunder. Victor opened a locked drawer on his desk and withdrew a thick manila envelope sealed with red wax. He broke the seal and slid a stack of legal documents across the polished mahogany. It was not the standard will that had been read aloud to Cynthia and me in this very room 6 months ago. It was a separate document titled Declaration of Trust. Victor explained that Nevada enforces incredibly rigid legal protections against estate fraud. In this state, unauthorized liquidation of inherited property is not treated as a minor civil dispute. The law does not care if the perpetrator shares your last name or sleeps under the same roof. It is classified as grand larceny. To ensure Cynthia could never claim the watches were a verbal gift or a shared marital asset, Thomas created a secondary, irrevocable trust, naming me as the sole beneficiary. But my father went one step further. He understood that physical documents can be challenged or claimed as forgeries in a messy probate court battle. So he removed all plausible deniability. Victor tapped a small silver flash drive resting on top of the paper stack. He revealed that 3 weeks before his death, Thomas sat in this exact office and filmed a secondary reading of the declaration. The video explicitly detailed his lack of faith in Cynthia's financial stewardship. More importantly, the declaration itemized every single timepiece by its exact unique serial number, legally binding them to the trust. I stared at the pristine pages in front of me. The alphanumeric string I had photographed off the silver spoon at the country club was listed right there on page 4. Rolex, Cosmograph Daytona Reference 1-16520. The reality of the situation shifted with a profound heavy weight. Cynthia's decision to empty the watch window was not an act of cruel favoritism. It was a calculated theft. Handing that collection to Trevor crossed a rigid legal boundary. She had stolen $400,000 of protected trust assets. Victor leaned forward, resting his forearms on the desk. He explained that if we confronted them now, Greg and Cynthia would simply return the watches and claim it was a terrible misunderstanding. They would say Trevor was just borrowing them for a networking event to build his confidence. The local authorities would likely dismiss it as a domestic family argument and decline to press charges. The threat would remain. Greg would eventually find another way to drain my father's legacy to pay off his gambling debts. We needed to eliminate their ability to retreat. We needed to trap them in a corner where the law offered no leniency. The strategy Victor outlined was ruthless and perfectly aligned with the architecture of digital security. We were going to build a legal snare utilizing the serial numbers indexed in the declaration. Victor instructed me to log into the global luxury watch registries and the national pawn databases. He told me to flag every single serial number associated with the collection as restricted property. But the crucial element of the plan required patience. I was not to report the items as stolen to the local police department just yet. If the police knocked on Greg's door today, the assets would merely be recovered. We needed a crime that carried mandatory minimum sentencing. We needed Trevor to attempt a commercial transaction. Victor explained the mechanics of the trap. Taking a stolen watch and attempting to secure a cash loan against it at a registered broker elevates the offense. It transforms a familial dispute into commercial fencing and felony fraud. It changes the jurisdiction and triggers statutes designed to crush organized theft rings. The moment Trevor handed one of those watches to a licensed broker and signed a pawn slip claiming ownership, he would be committing multiple felonies on camera. The audacity of the plan sent a surge of adrenaline through my veins. I had spent my entire career mitigating risk and preventing breaches before they occurred. My job was to keep the gates locked. Victor was asking me to intentionally leave a digital door wide open and wait for the intruders to step inside. He wanted me to watch them commit the crime in real time. He asked if I had the nerve to sit back and do nothing while my father's legacy was dangled in front of gray market dealers on the strip. I looked at the silver flash drive containing my father's final protective measure. He had spent his last days ensuring I would have the ammunition required to defend myself against the woman who was supposed to protect me. I owed it to him to pull the trigger. I told Victor to prepare the injunctions and the criminal referrals. I promised him I would monitor the databases around the clock. I gathered the copies of the declaration and placed them in my briefcase. I walked out of the brick building and into the glaring desert sunlight. The board was set. I just had to wait for Trevor to walk into a pawn shop and sign his own name on a confession. The transition back to my apartment felt like shifting from the physical world into the digital one. The heavy oak doors and leather chairs of Victor's office belonged to the past. My workspace, with its suspended monitors and fiber optic connection, belonged to the present. I brewed a cup of black coffee and sat down at the glass desk. The desert night had fallen outside my blackout shades, but inside the glow of the screens cast a cool blue light across the room. I opened a secure tunnel to the federal property registries. Las Vegas is a transient city where high-value items move fast. To combat organized theft, the pawn industry and luxury dealers rely on a centralized clearinghouse. If a person attempts to pawn a television, the local police database might catch it. If a person attempts to pawn a rare Swiss timepiece, the serial number is run through a federal node that flags international registries. My father taught me how to navigate these systems when I was 18 years old. He made me sit beside him while he logged the provenance of a newly acquired piece. He treated provenance as a sacred chain of custody. He explained that a watch without a recorded history was just an expensive liability. Cynthia always rolled her eyes during these lessons. She thought provenance was just a fancy word on a certificate she could throw away. She did not understand that provenance is a tracking device. I accessed the trust documentation Victor had provided and began entering the alphanumeric strings into the restricted property index. I flagged every single item from the mahogany winder. I did not mark them as stolen. Doing so would trigger an immediate local police response the next time they were scanned. Instead, I designated them under a specific administrative hold tied to an irrevocable estate trust. Any attempt to transfer ownership or borrow against the assets would require secondary authorization from the trust administrator. I was the administrator. For 3 days, the system remained silent. I went to work. I analyzed security protocols for my corporate clients. I drank my coffee. I waited. The tension hummed in the back of my mind like a low-voltage wire. I knew Trevor lacked the patience to hold on to the collection for long. Greg's casino markers were drawing closer to their expiration dates. The pressure inside their household must have been suffocating. The digital tripwire snapped on a Friday night. It was 11:45. The Las Vegas Strip was just reaching its peak chaotic rhythm. Inside my apartment, the silence was broken by a sharp chime from my cell phone. It was not a text message from a friend. It was an encrypted push notification from the registry dashboard. I set my book down and moved to the glass desk. I woke the monitors from their sleep state and logged into the portal. The dashboard displayed a flashing red alert. A query had been initiated. I clicked on the event log and traced the origin of the request. The query originated from a premier collateral lender located just off Las Vegas Boulevard. This was not a street corner pawn shop with barred windows. This was a high-end broker that catered to high rollers who suffered sudden losses at the baccarat tables and needed rapid six-figure loans to keep playing. They employed security guards in tailored suits and served scotch while evaluating collateral. The asset currently resting on their velvet appraisal mat was the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak. I pulled up the live transaction record. The broker had entered the serial number into the Federal Clearinghouse to verify the title before issuing a cash loan. The requested loan amount was $50,000. My phone rang. The caller ID displayed an out-of-state number. It was the automated verification system from the registry clearinghouse. I answered the call and placed the phone on the desk, turning on the speaker. A synthesized voice informed me that a restricted asset tied to my trust was currently being processed for a commercial pawn transaction. The system prompted me to make a choice. Press 1 to authorize the transaction. Press 2 to report the asset as stolen and dispatch local law enforcement to the broker's location. Press 3 to place a pending verification hold on the item. My finger hovered over the keypad. The urge to press 2 was a physical ache in my chest. If I pressed 2, patrol cars would arrive at the broker within minutes. Trevor would be detained. The watch would be recovered. The immediate threat would be neutralized. But I remembered Victor's cold smile in the mahogany office. I remembered his precise legal strategy. If the police arrived right now, Trevor had not yet signed the final paperwork. He could claim he was just having the watch appraised. He could play the role of the confused stepson who did not realize the item was restricted. Greg and Cynthia would hire a slick defense attorney to argue that it was a simple familial misunderstanding. The district attorney would likely drop the charges to avoid a messy probate dispute. They would walk away with a bruised ego, and Greg would simply find a new, more discreet way to liquidate the rest of my inheritance. I needed Trevor to commit to the fraud. I needed him to cross the line from a civil dispute into a federal offense. He had to sign his legal name on a commercial loan document pledging an asset he did not own. I pressed 3. The synthesized voice confirmed the selection. A pending verification hold had been applied to the asset. I ended the call and turned my attention back to the monitors. By selecting the third option, I had stalled the transaction without alerting Trevor or the broker to the impending trap. The broker's computer screen would currently display a routine administrative delay. In the world of high-value collateral loans, a 48-hour title check is a standard procedure. The broker would inform Trevor that the loan was approved in principle, but the funds could not be dispersed until the administrative hold cleared on Monday morning. Crucially, the broker would require Trevor to sign the pending loan agreement right then and there to lock in the terms. They would also require him to leave the Audemars Piguet in their high-security vault pending the final verification. I watched the dashboard on my monitor. The transaction status changed from active query to pending documentation. A digital progress bar appeared on the screen, representing the data packet being transmitted from the broker's local server to the federal registry. I leaned forward, resting my chin on my hands. I pictured Trevor standing at the polished counter. He was likely sweating under his designer shirt, anxious to get his hands on the $50,000 his father desperately needed. He was probably annoyed by the delay, but relieved that the broker had not rejected the watch. The broker was sliding a printed contract across the glass countertop. Trevor was picking up a pen. The digital progress bar on my screen crept forward. 20%, 40%. Trevor was reading the fine print. The fine print that explicitly stated the signer was the sole legal owner of the pledged collateral and held the right to transfer the title. 60%, 80%. He was signing his name. He was legally affirming a lie on a document regulated by federal financial statutes. He was handing over his government-issued identification to be photocopied and attached to the file. He was walking out of the broker, leaving my father's watch behind, believing he had successfully executed the first phase of the heist. The progress bar reached 100%. The screen flashed a green confirmation message. A digitized copy of the pending pawn slip was generated and archived in the registry ledger. I opened the attachment. There it was. Trevor's full legal name, his home address, and his signature, executed in blue ink. It was a perfect, undeniable digital confession. I saved the document to an encrypted folder on my local drive and forwarded a copy to Victor. I did not type a long message to the attorney. I simply attached the file and typed the word secured. I stood up from the glass desk and walked to the window. I pulled back the edge of the blackout shade and looked out at the distant glowing skyline of the Las Vegas Strip. Somewhere down there in the neon chaos, Trevor was driving home thinking he had secured a victory. He would tell Greg that the money was locked in and would be available after the weekend. They would celebrate their cleverness. They would toast to their success in the same country club dining room where they had mocked my silence. They had no idea that their attempt to steal my father's legacy had just handed me the exact weapon I needed to destroy theirs. The trap had closed around Trevor's wrist just as tightly as the Rolex Daytona he wore. Now all I had to do was wait for the anniversary dinner to let them feel the snap of the jaws. The Bellagio fountains danced to an orchestrated symphony as I walked through the main casino floor. The air smelled of pumped-in vanilla and high-stakes desperation. My father always hated the casinos. He called them monuments to statistical inevitability. He built his wealth by calculating risk and avoiding tables where the house held the mathematical advantage. Greg, on the other hand, lived his entire life sitting at those tables begging the dealer for a lucky card. I bypassed the gaming floor and headed toward the prime steakhouse tucked away near the indoor conservatory. The private dining room was an exercise in excess. Mahogany-paneled walls absorbed the sound of the main restaurant, creating an airtight bubble of privilege. A chandelier of spun glass hung over a circular table set for four. Heavy silver cutlery rested beside imported crystal glassware. Cynthia had reserved this suite to celebrate her one-year anniversary with Greg. She always equated privacy with exclusivity. I saw it as a containment zone. Trevor slouched in his chair to the left. He wore a fitted suit jacket over a black t-shirt. The Rolex Daytona peeked out from under his cuff, catching the ambient light of the chandelier. Every time he reached for his water glass or gestured with his hands, the brushed steel of my father's legacy flashed in my direction. I took the remaining seat facing the door. My mother reached across the white linen tablecloth and squeezed my hand. Her skin was cold and covered in expensive lotion. I let her hold my hand. I played the part of the compliant daughter to perfection. Waiters in tailored vests moved silently around us, placing plates of dry, aged ribeye and roasted root vegetables on the table. Greg held court talking about the trajectory of the Las Vegas real estate market. He used words like expansion and market dominance. It was a fascinating performance, considering I had read the foreclosure notices filed against him just 48 hours prior. I sliced my steak and listened to the fiction. The ambush came precisely between the main course and the dessert service. Cynthia dabbed her lips with a cloth napkin and set it down carefully beside her plate. She looked at Greg and gave a subtle, rehearsed nod. The coordination was seamless, indicating they had practiced this exact transition on the drive over. "Gemma." She began, her voice dropping to a tone of practiced maternal concern. "Greg and I have been discussing the future. The commercial real estate market is prime right now, and Greg has an exclusive opportunity to acquire a prime lot near the new stadium. But rapid acquisitions require immediate liquidity." Greg leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "We are pulling capital from every available avenue," he said, using the corporate jargon he adopted to mask his incompetence. "But traditional banks move too slowly for deals of this magnitude. We need a bridge loan to secure the escrow." Cynthia smiled, a tight, strained expression. "We want to take out an equity line on the Henderson house," she said. "The Henderson house. The property my father bought outright with cash 20 years ago. It was a sprawling single-story estate with a reinforced security perimeter that my father designed himself. It was his fortress. He placed the property in a revocable trust that Cynthia currently controlled as the surviving spouse. However, because my father was meticulous, my name was listed as a secondary beneficiary on the deed restrictions. Cynthia could not leverage the property or take out a mortgage without my formal notarized signature. They were not simply asking for a favor. They were asking me to hand over the equity of my childhood home to feed a substantial hidden gambling debt. The sheer audacity of the request threatened to break my composure. She had already stolen a $400,000 watch collection to pawn on the Strip. Now she wanted the roof over my head. Trevor snickered, taking a long, arrogant sip of his wine. He adjusted his watch, making sure the steel band caught the light. "It is just business, Gemma," he said. "Sometimes you have to leverage the old assets to build the new empire." I did not throw my water in Greg's face. I did not stand up and expose the casino markers I had found in the county databases. In my profession, you do not reveal your countermeasures until the adversary is fully committed to the attack. I set my fork down, aligning it perfectly parallel to my knife. At that exact moment, the heavy wooden door opened. A sommelier entered the room carrying a fresh bottle of Reserve Cabernet Sauvignon. He wore a crisp white jacket and moved with practiced silence. He stepped up to the table and began presenting the label to Greg. I waited until the sommelier inserted the corkscrew to speak. I needed the acoustics of the room to carry my voice perfectly. If the commercial lot is such a guaranteed return, I asked, keeping my tone light and inquisitive. Why do you need my equity? I thought the new watch investments were providing the liquid capital for your ventures. I gestured vaguely toward Trevor's wrist. You mentioned at brunch that Trevor was moving high-end vintage hardware to secure capital. Is that not covering the bridge loan? Greg swelled with pride. He was a man who could not resist, bragging especially in front of service staff, who he viewed as a captive audience. He was eager to defend his financial strategy and assert his dominance in front of the pouring sommelier. The watch investments are phenomenal, Greg declared, his voice booming off the mahogany walls. Trevor is moving a few curated assets as we speak. We have 50,000 locked in pending final verification on Monday morning from a top-tier broker on the Strip. But that 50,000 is just operating capital to keep the lights on. The stadium real estate deal requires a much larger safety net. That is why we need the house. He said it out loud. He admitted that Trevor was moving assets to secure capital. He explicitly named the $50,000 transaction occurring at the broker on the Strip. He confessed to the timeline of the Monday verification. He confirmed that the funds were being used for his personal operating capital. The sommelier finished pouring the dark red wine into Greg's glass. He placed the bottle carefully on the table and offered a polite bow before stepping back toward the door. A neutral third-party witness had just overheard a man confess to orchestrating the liquidation of stolen trust assets. The sommelier walked out and the heavy door clicked shut behind him. Cynthia beamed, looking at Greg with undisguised adoration. She turned back to me, blind to the trap that had just snapped shut around her husband's ankles. You see, Gemma, it is all part of a highly diversified portfolio. We are a family. It is your duty to help us build this legacy. Your father would want us to pool our resources for the greater good. I looked at the three of them, sitting in their luxury private room, drinking expensive wine paid for with borrowed time and stolen money. The claustrophobia of their abuse was palpable. They felt entitled to every single thing my father had built. They believed I was too timid to tell them no. They thought my silence was surrender. I picked up my water glass and held it up to the light. It sounds like a very complex strategy, I said, taking a slow sip. I will need to review the paperwork for the equity line before I sign anything. Send the documents to my office on Monday morning. Cynthia's shoulders dropped in visible relief. She believed she had won. She reached for her wine glass, her diamond bracelet catching the chandelier light. Greg raised his glass toward me, offering a silent toast to my maturity and compliance. Trevor smirked and pulled out his phone, losing interest in the conversation now that the money was supposedly secured. The head waiter returned to clear the dinner plates and present the leather-bound dessert menus. I did not even open mine. I handed it right back to the waiter. I will take the gold leaf chocolate soufflé, I said, leaning back in my chair. And please bring a bottle of your 20-year vintage port to pair with it. Put it on Greg's tab. We are celebrating his new investments. I smiled across the table, letting the silence stretch comfortably. They ate their desserts and drank their expensive wine, celebrating a mirage. They had no idea that on Monday morning there would be no equity line and there would be no $50,000 payout. On Monday morning, the federal hold would clear, and the digital tripwire I had set would detonate right in their faces. Monday morning arrived with the harsh clarity typical of the Mojave Desert. The sky was a pale, unbroken blue. Inside my apartment, the environment was meticulously controlled. The thermostat held steady. The blackout shades were drawn back just enough to let in a narrow band of natural sunlight. I stood in the kitchen performing my morning ritual. I did not rush. I measured exactly 22 grams of Ethiopian coffee beans and ground them to a medium coarse consistency. I placed the paper filter in the glass dripper and began the slow circular pour of hot water. There is a distinct satisfaction in watching the dark liquid bloom. The process requires patience and precision. My father taught me to appreciate routines that demand focus. He used to say that a distracted mind is an open invitation for an adversary. I watched the steam rise and breathed in the rich, earthy aroma. My phone rested on the marble counter next to the digital scale. It was quiet. It had been quiet all weekend while my mother and Greg celebrated their imaginary windfall. At precisely 9 o'clock, the screen illuminated. A calendar notification appeared indicating the expiration of the 48-hour administrative delay. The verification period at the luxury broker was officially over. I picked up the phone and dialed Victor's direct line. He answered on the first ring. His voice carried the crisp professional cadence of a man who had spent decades outmaneuvering desperate people in courtrooms. He confirmed that the Federal Registry had lifted the temporary hold. The broker on the strip was currently refreshing their system to clear the final paperwork for Trevor. Victor asked if I was ready to execute the hard block. I poured the last few ounces of water over the coffee grounds. I watched the final drops fall into the glass carafe. I told him to initiate the protocol. Victor pressed a sequence of keys on his terminal. In that fraction of a second, the administrative delay vanished. It was instantly replaced by a priority red flag classifying the Audemars Piguet as stolen property belonging to an irrevocable estate trust. The trap we designed had just slammed shut. I poured my coffee into a ceramic mug and took a slow sip. The flavor was bright and complex. I stayed on the line with Victor, listening to the ambient sound of his office. He had established a direct channel with the security director at the brokerage firm. We waited in silence for the resulting impact. 15 minutes later, Victor's second line rang. I heard the muffled tones of a brief conversation before Victor returned his attention to me. The execution had unfolded perfectly. Victor relayed the events exactly as the security director described them. Trevor had swaggered into the high-end pawn shop at 9:05. He wore designer sunglasses and an arrogant smirk, expecting to walk out with a briefcase full of cash. He approached the velvet-lined counter and asked the head appraiser to finalize the loan agreement. The appraiser typed Trevor's information into the terminal to refresh the federal clearance. Instead of a green approval screen, the monitor flashed a critical alert. The system locked the transaction, preventing any funds from being dispersed. The alert explicitly stated the collateral was registered as stolen trust property and mandated immediate confiscation. The appraiser remained calm. It was standard protocol for a high-volume luxury dealer. He stepped back from the counter and pressed a silent alarm button hidden beneath the desk. Two private security contractors, dressed in tailored dark suits, emerged from the back office and positioned themselves near the front exit. Trevor noticed the shift in the room. The appraiser informed him that the asset had been flagged by a federal registry as stolen property. He asked Trevor to step into a private office to resolve the discrepancy with law enforcement. My father always warned me that cowards panic the moment their facade is challenged. Trevor did not attempt to explain himself. He did not ask to call his lawyer. The realization that he was standing in a room with armed guards trying to fence a stolen watch triggered a base instinct for flight. He dropped the expensive pen he was holding. He backed away from the counter and bolted toward the heavy glass doors. The security guards did not chase him. They are trained to secure the asset, not engage in foot pursuits over nonviolent property crimes. They watched Trevor sprint out onto Las Vegas Boulevard, disappearing into the morning crowd of tourists. He left the Audemars Piguet sitting safely inside the broker's reinforced vault. Victor told me the broker had formally transferred custody of the watch to the trust. The first piece of my father's legacy was secured. Trevor was now on tape fleeing the scene of a felony fraud attempt. I thanked Victor and ended the call. The silence returned to my kitchen, but it was short-lived. Less than 2 minutes later, my phone began to vibrate against the marble counter. The caller identification displayed my mother's name. I did not answer. I let the phone vibrate until the call transferred to the automated answering service. I took another sip of my coffee and waited for the notification. The screen pinged, indicating a new voicemail had been received. The digital transcription software generated a preview of the message. The text was a chaotic block of capitalized letters and fragmented sentences. I pressed play to listen to the audio. Cynthia's voice filled the kitchen. It was shrill and distorted, lacking any of the polished elegance she displayed at the steakhouse the night before. The mask had slipped entirely. She was breathing heavily into the receiver. "Gemma, pick up the phone. Pick up the phone right now. What kind of sick game are you playing?" Trevor just called Greg. He was hyperventilating. He said the pawn shop tried to arrest him. He said they claimed the watch was stolen. Stolen. Those watches belong to me. I gave them to him. You have no right to interfere with my property. Greg is furious. He is losing his mind. Call the broker right now and tell them it is a misunderstanding. You are ruining everything. Call me back immediately. The message ended with a sharp click. I set my mug down next to the sink. The dynamic of the entire conflict had shifted in the span of an hour. For the past year, my mother and her new husband believed they held total authority over my life and my inheritance. They thought they could casually dismantle my father's achievements to fund their reckless lifestyle. They viewed me as a passive obstacle they could simply step around. Now they had collided with a reinforced concrete wall. The panic in Cynthia's voice was a clear indicator that the reality of their situation was beginning to dawn on them. However, the voicemail also revealed their fundamental ignorance. Cynthia still believed she owned the collection. She thought the block at the pawn shop was a simple clerical error or a petty grievance I had filed to cause trouble. She demanded that I call the broker and fix the misunderstanding. She assumed I possessed the power to easily undo the damage because she still viewed me as her subservient daughter. They did not understand the scale of the trap. They did not realize that the Audemars Piguet was now locked behind federal statutes and trust laws that no phone call could bypass. They did not comprehend that Trevor was officially documented attempting commercial fraud. Greg's desperate need for liquid cash had not disappeared. The casino markers were still impending. The loss of the $50,000 loan meant his financial collapse was accelerating. Desperation breeds irrational decisions. If they could not get the money through Trevor, they would try to force it out of me directly. I walked into my bedroom to retrieve my suit jacket. I needed to head to the office. The digital perimeter was secure, but the physical confrontation was imminent. I knew Greg and Cynthia would not wait patiently for a return phone call. They would seek me out to demand compliance. They would bring their rage and their entitlement right to my front door. I checked my reflection in the mirror, ensuring my expression was neutral and my posture was rigid. The digital snare had caught its first prey. It was time to prepare for the inevitable ambush. The corporate campus where I worked was a fortress of glass and steel located far away from the chaotic tourist corridors of the Strip. Access required biometric scans and encrypted badge swipes. My father always appreciated this building. He respected environments that prioritized structural integrity over visual appeal. I parked my car in the secure underground garage and took the elevator up to the main visitor atrium. The atrium was a vast open space flooded with natural light and heavily monitored by discreet cameras and security personnel. As the elevator doors slid open, I saw them immediately. Cynthia and Greg were pacing near the front reception desk. They looked entirely out of place in the sterile high-tech environment. Cynthia wore an oversized designer pair of sunglasses indoors, clutching a luxury handbag like a shield. Greg was sweating through the collar of his custom-tailored suit. His face was flushed with a volatile mixture of panic and rage. They had bypassed the outer gate by claiming a family emergency, but the reception security team had wisely kept them detained in the public waiting area. I walked toward them, keeping my stride steady and my breathing measured. I did not alter my expression. I was entering a hostile engagement, and I needed to control the tempo of the interaction from the very first second. Cynthia spotted me and closed the distance rapidly. She removed her sunglasses, revealing eyes red with fury. Her polished country club demeanor had completely evaporated. She pointed a manicured finger directly at my chest. "You need to pick up your phone right now and call that pawn shop," she demanded. Her voice echoed off the marble floors, drawing the attention of two security guards standing near the turnstiles. "You are going to tell them that you made a terrible mistake, and you are going to authorize the release of that watch to Trevor. You have absolutely no right to interfere with my personal property. I stopped walking and stood perfectly still. I kept a comfortable distance between us, ensuring that any sudden physical movement on their part would be intercepted by the building's security. I do not have the authority to lift a federal restriction on stolen property, I said, keeping my voice low and completely calm. The watches belong to an irrevocable trust established by my father. The assets were removed without legal authorization. That makes them stolen goods. Greg stepped in front of Cynthia, attempting to use his physical size to intimidate me. He leaned in close, smelling of stale coffee and expensive cologne. "You think you are very smart playing these little computer games with our lives," he sneered. "You think you can just click a button and steal our assets. But you are dealing with the real world now, Gemma. In the real world, actions have consequences. We are not leaving this building until you fix this." I looked Greg directly in the eyes. I did not blink. I told him he was free to stay in the visitor lobby as long as he liked, but I had a network vulnerability assessment meeting in 10 minutes. I turned my body slightly to indicate I was preparing to walk away. Greg reached into the interior pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He thrust it toward me, stopping just inches from my face. "You want to talk about legal authorization," he said, his voice thick with arrogant triumph. Read it, and then tell me who is going to jail for estate fraud." I did not take the paper from his hand. I simply lowered my gaze and read the text printed on the page. The document was titled Memorandum of Gifting. The paragraphs were filled with dense, convoluted legal jargon stating that Thomas Bennett knowingly and willingly transferred full ownership of his entire luxury timepiece collection to his beloved wife Cynthia upon his passing. At the bottom of the page rested a signature that vaguely resembled my father's handwriting alongside a stamped notary seal. My father was a man of exacting standards. He never used the phrase beloved wife in any legal context because he considered emotional language in a binding contract to be a sign of amateurism. He exclusively printed his formal documents on heavy bond paper with a specific watermark. The paper Greg was holding was standard cheap office stock. Furthermore, the signature lacked the sharp, aggressive loops my father always used when signing his legal name. To a trained eye, the forgery was glaringly obvious. To a desperate man drowning in casino debt, it was a masterpiece. Greg puffed out his chest, believing he had just delivered a fatal blow to my strategy. "I found this in his old files," Greg lied smoothly. "Your father signed this over to Cynthia months before he died. He knew you would try to hoard the wealth, so he protected her. If you do not call that registry and release the block right now, I am taking this document straight to the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. I will have you arrested for filing a false police report for grand larceny and for attempting to extort your own mother. You will lose your job, your security clearance, and your freedom." The audacity of the threat was staggering. He was standing in the lobby of a cybersecurity firm attempting to extort an analyst using a piece of paper he likely printed on his home inkjet printer. He was confident because the culture of Las Vegas rewards bold bluffs. He thought the sheer aggression of his threat would force me to capitulate. I allowed a flicker of hesitation to cross my face, feeding his delusion. I let him believe his trump card was working. I took a slow breath and looked at the forged paper again. If this document is legitimate, it changes the legal standing of the trust, I said, maintaining a tone of reluctant concession. But I cannot simply call a federal registry and lift a block based on a piece of folded paper in a lobby. I need to present this to my attorney so he can formally retract the claim. Greg smiled a predatory wide grin. He thought he had broken me. "Then call your lawyer and tell him to drop it," he ordered. I shook my head. "My lawyer requires digital verification for his records. He will not initiate a retraction without a clean, verified copy of the memorandum. I need you to email me a high-resolution scan of that document right now. Send it to my secure inbox so I can forward it to his office for immediate review." Cynthia crossed her arms, looking impatient. "Just take a picture of it with your phone," she snapped. "A photograph will not satisfy the legal requirements for a federal retraction." I lied smoothly. "I need the original digital file you created when you scanned it for your records. If you email the source file directly to me, I will process it with my legal team, and we can resolve this before the authorities get involved. Greg was a man who understood leverage, but possessed zero understanding of technology. He viewed a digital file as nothing more than a picture on a screen. He did not realize that every digital document carries a vast invisible payload of underlying data. He was eager to prove his dominance and secure his victory. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his smartphone. "Fine," Greg said, tapping aggressively on his screen. "I am sending the PDF file right now. You have 1 hour to clear that pawnshop block, or I am driving straight to the police station." I waited in silence while he navigated his email application. I watched his thumb press the send button. A few seconds later, my smartwatch vibrated against my wrist, confirming the receipt of an email with an attachment. I received the file. I told him, "I will take this to my desk and begin the review process with my counsel." Greg pointed his finger at me one last time. "1 hour, Gemma. Do not make me ruin your life." I turned away from them and walked toward the security turnstiles. I swiped my badge and pushed through the glass barriers, leaving them standing in the bright sunlight of the atrium. I did not look back. I walked straight to the secure elevator and rode it up to the 4th floor. I entered my private office, locked the door, and sat down at my workstation. I opened the email Greg had just sent me and downloaded the attached PDF file to a secure sandbox environment. I did not care about the text printed on the page. I cared about the hidden architecture of the file itself. I opened a diagnostic tool designed to extract hidden metadata from digital documents. In the state of Nevada, submitting forged documents to claim assets from a high-value estate is a severe felony. Proving a physical signature is fake often requires expensive handwriting experts and lengthy court battles. Proving a digital forgery takes less than 60 seconds. The diagnostic tool populated my screen with lines of raw data. The hidden tags embedded inside the PDF file told a perfect, undeniable story. The document was not created months before my father's death. The creation date stamped deep in the file architecture was exactly 48 hours ago. The author tag listed the exact name of Greg's personal laptop computer. The software utilized to generate the file was a consumer-grade word processor registered to Greg's email address. The geolocation data embedded by his smartphone when he sent the email confirmed the file originated from his residential Internet Protocol address. Greg had not just handed me a forged contract. He had handed me a complete, comprehensive digital confession. He had voluntarily transmitted a fraudulent legal document across a cellular network in an attempt to extort a trust administrator. He had handed a cybersecurity expert the exact cryptographic evidence required to send him to prison. I compiled the metadata report, binding it to the original file Greg sent. I opened a new secure communication channel to Victor. I attached the forged memorandum and the diagnostic proof. I typed a brief message explaining that the adversary had just escalated their offensive from grand larceny to federal wire fraud and extortion. I clicked send. The villain's absolute hubris had just sealed their fate. The legal snare was no longer just a trap, it was an execution block. The drive back to the downtown legal district felt remarkably serene. The chaotic confrontation in my corporate lobby had washed over me, leaving nothing but a sharpened sense of purpose. I navigated the heavy traffic on the interstate with relaxed shoulders. My mother and her husband operated on adrenaline and intimidation. They relied on volume to obscure their profound incompetence. I operated on protocols. Protocols do not shout, they simply execute. I parked in the shaded subterranean structure beneath the brick building and took the private elevator up to the executive floor. Victor's receptionist anticipated my arrival. She offered a polite nod and immediately unlatched the heavy wooden door leading into the inner sanctum. The mahogany-paneled office smelled of old paper and polished leather. The environment was a sanctuary of calculated reason. Victor sat behind his expansive desk, sorting through a stack of freshly printed documents. The digital file I transmitted from my secure sandbox earlier that afternoon was now translated into tangible evidence. I took the familiar seat opposite him. We did not exchange pleasantries or discuss the weather. The time for casual conversation had expired the moment Greg demanded a ransom for my own inheritance. Victor pushed a crisp white sheet of paper across the desk. It was the metadata report I generated detailing the hidden architecture of the forged memorandum. He traced a manicured finger along the lines of raw data I had parsed and highlighted. You documented a flawless chain of custody, Victor noted, his voice carrying a quiet reverence for the irrefutable facts. The creation timestamp is the definitive kill shot. According to your extraction, Greg generated this file exactly 48 hours ago. I nodded, keeping my posture perfectly rigid. He used a basic consumer word processor registered to his personal email account, I explained. The device signature matches the laptop he keeps in the Henderson study. When he transmitted the file to my inbox this afternoon, his cellular provider stamped the email with geographic coordinates, placing him squarely within a 5-mile radius of my office. He hand-delivered a cryptographically verified confession of forgery. Victor leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. In the state of Nevada, the jurisprudence surrounding high-net-worth estates is notoriously unforgiving. The statutes were written specifically to deter predatory opportunists from circling vulnerable widows and heirs. When Greg created a fraudulent legal contract to claim ownership of a $400,000 luxury watch collection, he crossed a very dark line. When he attempted to leverage that fraudulent document to extort the rightful trust administrator, he guaranteed his own destruction. Victor opened a thick, leather-bound folio resting on his desk. He began to outline the mechanics of the retribution. There would be no dramatic screaming matches. There would be no tearful interventions or emotional pleas for reconciliation. We were going to dismantle their lives using signatures, timestamps, and notarized affidavits. We are filing a comprehensive civil suit tomorrow morning, Victor stated, handing me the first draft of the complaint. The primary charges include estate fraud and the conversion of protected assets. We are also submitting a formal referral to the district attorney for grand larceny. The luxury timepiece collection is legally categorized as a restricted holding. Transferring those holdings without authorization is a severe felony. I read through the pages of the legal complaint. The language was cold, precise, and devoid of any emotional sentiment. It was a surgical dissection of my mother's greed and Greg's staggering hubris. But a civil suit is a slow mechanism. Victor continued, pulling a second stack of papers from the folio. Greg is currently drowning in casino markers. Desperate men do desperate things when they realize a lawsuit is impending. If we simply serve him with a complaint, he will panic and attempt to hide his remaining liquidity. He might try to offshore funds or liquidate the few legitimate assets he still controls. We must neutralize his financial mobility before he even knows he is under attack. Victor placed a document titled Ex parte Injunction on the desk. An ex parte proceeding allows a judge to grant an emergency order without requiring the opposing party to be present or notified in advance. Victor explained that the cryptographic evidence I secured was overwhelming. It provided the exact standard of proof required to convince a judge that Greg posed an immediate flight risk regarding the estate assets. This injunction will freeze every single financial account tied to Greg and Cynthia. Victor explained, his tone smooth and lethal. Their checking accounts, their savings, their investment portfolios, and their credit lines will be suspended indefinitely, pending the resolution of the civil suit. When Greg tries to buy a cup of coffee tomorrow afternoon, his card will decline. When Cynthia tries to pay her country club dues, the transaction will be rejected. They will be entirely cut off from their oxygen supply. I stared at the injunction. The sheer magnitude of the counterstrike settled over me. My mother had spent my entire childhood treating our relationship like a transactional balance sheet. When I wanted to take advanced coding classes, she tallied the cost and reminded me how much I owed her for my upbringing. When my father purchased a modest used car for my high school graduation, she calculated the depreciation and complained about the expense. She never viewed me as a daughter to be nurtured. She viewed me as a ledger, a column of debts and liabilities that she intended to collect on. As I sat in the quiet mahogany office, I felt a profound emotional detachment solidify in my chest. The last lingering shreds of familial guilt evaporated. You cannot mourn a bond that never existed. My mother chose to operate as a hostile corporate entity seeking to raid an acquisition. I was simply responding with the appropriate regulatory sanctions. She wanted a ledger, and I was finalizing the accounting. Victor pressed an intercom button on his desk, requesting the presence of his in-house notary public. A moment later, a stern woman in a gray suit entered the room carrying a heavy metal embosser and a bound journal. She asked for my government-issued identification. I handed her my driver's license. She verified my identity and recorded the details in her ledger. She directed me to sign the affidavits attesting to the validity of the metadata and the timeline of the extortion attempt in the lobby. I picked up the gold fountain pen Victor offered. The ink flowed smoothly across the heavy bond paper. I signed my name with deliberate, precise strokes. I authorized the civil suit. I authorized the emergency injunction. I authorized the systematic financial ruin of the people who tried to steal my father's legacy. The notary gathered the signed documents. She placed her metal stamp over the signature lines. Thud. The heavy, satisfying sound of the notary stamp echoed through the silent office. Thud. Every strike of the embosser transformed a piece of paper into a binding legal weapon. Thud. The seal was pressed into the paper, leaving a raised permanent crest. The legal fortress was now fully armed and operational. The perimeter was secured and the automated defenses were primed to fire. Victor thanked the notary, and she quietly exited the room, leaving us alone with the finalized execution orders. He neatly stacked the paperwork and placed it into a reinforced courier envelope. The courier would deliver the packet directly to the presiding judge's chambers at the county courthouse first thing in the morning. By noon, the financial freeze would ripple through the banking institutions across the state of Nevada. "We have secured the high ground," Victor said, leaning back and folding his hands over his stomach. "Tomorrow their reality will fracture." I thanked him for his precision. I gathered my belongings and exited the brick building, stepping back into the warm evening air. The Las Vegas skyline glowed in the distance, a monument to risk and ruin. I drove home feeling a deep, undisturbed calm. The trap was locked, but I knew the nature of the adversary. A predator caught in a snare does not simply accept defeat. When the financial freeze hit Greg's accounts, he would realize that his forged document had failed to intimidate me. The realization that his bluff had been called would strip away his arrogant facade. Cornered animals are the most dangerous. Greg was staring at the expiration of his casino markers and the sudden evaporation of his bank accounts. He would search for any available leverage to break the jaws of the trap. He would stop trying to play legal games and resort to something much more destructive. I parked my car and walked into my apartment, prepared for the desperate retaliation that was bound to arrive. The Nevada sun broke over the horizon, casting long shadows across the valley. Inside my apartment, the temperature remained a steady 68 degrees. I dressed in a tailored gray suit and gathered my credentials. My career was the one sanctuary my mother could never touch. I earned my position through relentless study and late nights analyzing network traffic. I did not rely on family connections or inherited wealth. I relied on my intellect. That morning, I felt a profound sense of anticipation. I was in the final stages of vetting for a promotion to senior systems architect. The new role involved overseeing defense subcontracts and required a top-secret federal security clearance. Securing a federal clearance is an invasive process. Investigators comb through every aspect of your existence. They examine your travel history, your social associations, and your financial stability. The government operates on a simple premise. A person struggling with debt or entangled in legal disputes is a prime target for foreign blackmail. A pristine background is mandatory. Cynthia knew about this rigorous vetting. She used to complain loudly when investigators called her for reference checks during my initial hiring phase. She viewed my career as a tedious government job that lacked the glamour of casino development or commercial real estate. She never understood the prestige of the work, but she remembered the strict rules governing my employment. I merged onto the interstate, heading toward the corporate campus. My phone rested in the center console, the screen illuminated with a new text message. The notification bypassed my filtered contacts. It was a direct message from Greg. I did not open it while driving. I maintained my speed and navigated the morning traffic with practiced focus. I parked in the secure underground garage and turned off the engine. The concrete walls of the structure blocked the ambient city noise, leaving me in heavy silence. I picked up the device and opened the message thread. The text did not contain insults or emotional outbursts. It was a calculated precision strike. Greg wrote that he knew all about my upcoming promotion and the federal background check. He stated that investigators take allegations of financial crimes very seriously. He then laid out his ultimatum. He threatened to file a civil lawsuit in Clark County Court by noon that very day. The lawsuit would formally accuse me of elder abuse and financial manipulation. He planned to claim that I was using my technical skills to defraud a vulnerable widow out of her rightful property. He finished the message with a simple trade. He wrote that if I logged into the registry and released the block on the watch collection, he would keep the family dispute private. If I refused, he would file the suit and watch my security clearance evaporate. I sat in the dim light of the parking garage. A cold wave washed over my skin. My heart rate elevated, pushing a steady rhythm against my ribs. Greg had found the single pressure point that could bring me to my knees. A pending civil suit alleging elder abuse is a severe red flag for any federal investigator. It does not matter if the accusations are baseless. The mere existence of the filing triggers an automatic suspension of the clearance process, pending a lengthy investigation. An automatic suspension meant the immediate loss of the promotion. It meant my current employer would sideline me to protect their government contracts. Greg was threatening to dismantle the identity I had spent a decade building. For a fraction of a second, the urge to surrender was overwhelming. The watches were just physical objects. They were gears and springs and polished steel. They held sentimental value, but they were not my livelihood. My career paid my mortgage and provided my independence. The logical side of my brain calculated the cost of compliance. Releasing the federal block would save my clearance. It would allow Greg and Trevor to fence the assets and pay the casino markers. The problem would vanish. I hovered my thumb over the keyboard, contemplating a brief reply of surrender. Then I remembered my father's lessons. When a ransomware syndicate locks a corporate server and demands payment, you do not send the funds. Paying the ransom only verifies your vulnerability. It marks you as a willing victim, ensuring the predators will return the next time they need capital. If I surrendered my father's legacy to save my job, Greg would realize he held a permanent weapon. He would use the threat of a lawsuit every time he accumulated new gambling debts. I could not negotiate with a hostile actor. I needed to isolate the threat and consult my legal architect. I locked the doors of my vehicle and dialed Victor's secure line. He answered with his usual calm, professional cadence. I did not waste time summarizing my fears. I read Greg's text message aloud, word for word. I laid out the stakes regarding the federal clearance and the catastrophic career implications of a public elder abuse allegation. I asked Victor how long a frivolous lawsuit would stay on the public docket before we could get a judge to dismiss it. I expected him to sound concerned. I expected him to strategize a rapid defense motion to protect my employment record. Instead, Victor let out a short breath that sounded remarkably like a laugh. The tension in my chest paused. Victor told me to take a deep breath and look at the situation through the lens of a prosecutor rather than a victim. He explained that Greg was operating under the illusion of dominance because the financial freeze we ordered yesterday had just hit his accounts. The bank likely declined his credit cards that morning, sending him into a blind panic. He was thrashing in the water, grasping for any available leverage. Victor broke down the legal mechanics of the text message. He explained that a person is allowed to file a lawsuit to settle a legitimate dispute. A person is even allowed to inform opposing counsel that a lawsuit is forthcoming. However, the law draws a very sharp boundary when demands are attached to defamatory threats. Threatening to fabricate a heinous claim like elder abuse, specifically to coerce a victim into surrendering protected trust assets, is not a legal negotiation. In the state of Nevada, That specific action meets the precise statutory definition of criminal extortion. Victor pointed out the fatal flaw in Greg's execution. If Greg had pulled me aside in a dark hallway and whispered those threats, he might have created a difficult situation. It would have been a matter of my word against his. But Greg was arrogant. He believed his status shielded him from consequences. He typed the threat out in plain text and transmitted it across a traceable cellular network. He created a permanent time-stamped cryptographic record of his own crime. By putting the threat in writing, Greg handed us the final nail for his own coffin. He committed wire fraud and extortion in a single paragraph. Victor explained that we would not wait for him to file his baseless lawsuit. We were going to append his text message directly to our existing civil complaint and forward the entire package to the felony division of the district attorney's office. An extortion charge carries severe mandatory penalties. A federal investigator reviewing my clearance would see the elder abuse threat not as a legitimate red flag, but as the documented crime of a desperate gambler attempting to blackmail a federal contractor. The fear that had paralyzed me moments earlier evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, pristine clarity. Greg thought he was playing a winning hand. He was entirely blind to the fact that he had just documented his own demise. He handed a cybersecurity analyst a digital confession to a severe felony. The extortion attempt did not weaken our position. It fortified the legal fortress, making it impenetrable. I thanked Victor and ended the call. I stepped out of my car and walked toward the elevator banks. My stride was even and my pulse was steady. Greg's attempt to terrify me had only provided the ultimate leverage. It was time to shift from a defensive posture to a proactive strike. I was not going to wait for Greg to realize his mistake. I was going to secure the rest of the physical assets before he had a chance to hide them. I stepped out of the elevator and walked onto the main floor of the cybersecurity firm. My colleagues moved past me with their coffee cups and morning briefings, discussing upcoming network patches and vulnerability reports. They had no idea that I had just received a text message threatening to destroy my entire career. I did not engage in small talk. I walked straight to my private office, closed the heavy door, and locked it. I sat down at my workstation and placed my phone face down on the glass desk. I was not going to reply to Greg. Engaging with an extortionist validates their perceived power. Silence starves them. I needed to remove his leverage entirely by securing the remaining watches before he could use them as bargaining chips. The Audemars Piguet was safe in the vault of the luxury broker on the Strip, but the rest of the collection was still in the wind. My father owned a vintage Patek Philippe, a Vacheron Constantin, and several other irreplaceable timepieces. Greg and Trevor had physical possession of them, but Greg's bank accounts were currently frozen by our injunction. Greg was far too paranoid to keep high-value stolen assets inside the Henderson house while facing a severe financial crisis. He would have instructed Trevor to hide them somewhere secure. Finding that hiding place required an understanding of human flaws rather than complex code. My father used to say that vanity leaves the brightest trail. Trevor was a creature of profound narcissism. He could not resist documenting his entire life for an audience of strangers online. He posted photographs of his leased cars, his expensive cocktails, and his perceived elite status. Cynthia always encouraged this behavior, telling him that building a personal brand was essential for success in Las Vegas. She cultivated his arrogance, never realizing it would be his undoing. I opened a dedicated secure terminal on my workstation and accessed his public social media profiles. I bypassed the standard visual feeds and ran a diagnostic script designed to extract the embedded geolocation data from his recent posts. Every time Trevor uploaded a picture, his smartphone attached invisible coordinates detailing his exact physical location. The screen populated with a digital map of the Las Vegas Valley, overlaid with red dots indicating his movements over the past week. I filtered out the country club, the luxury bars, and his residential addresses. I looked for anomalies. I looked for a location he visited during banking hours that did not align with his fabricated commercial real estate job. A dense cluster of data points emerged near a private wealth management facility in the upscale neighborhood of Summerlin. The facility offered high-security anonymous safe deposit boxes. It was exactly the kind of establishment a desperate man would use to stash fenced goods. Trevor was not meticulous enough to execute this operation flawlessly. He had uploaded a photograph of himself holding a steering wheel 3 days ago. The caption boasted about securing his financial future. In the background of the image resting on the passenger seat was a partial view of a manila folder. I enhanced the resolution of the image, sharpening the blurred edges and isolating the text printed on the tab of the folder. It read, Desert Apex Holdings. I opened another window and accessed the Nevada Secretary of State Business Registry. I searched for the entity named Desert Apex Holdings. The results returned a limited liability company registered a mere 10 days ago. The registered agent was a generic third-party proxy service, but the mailing address traced directly back to an apartment Trevor rented before moving into the Henderson house. They had created a shell company to rent a secure vault, bypassing their personal names to avoid detection. They thought they were operating like sophisticated corporate criminals. They were operating like amateurs, leaving digital fingerprints on every surface they touched. I compiled the geolocation coordinates, the shell company registration details, and the enhanced photograph. I transmitted the packet to Victor through our encrypted communication channel. I typed a brief message explaining that Trevor was storing the remaining trust assets in a private vault under a dummy corporation in Summerlin. Victor did not hesitate. He took the extortion text message Greg sent me and combined it with the tracking data. He petitioned the presiding judge for an immediate writ of replevin, authorizing a civil seizure of the safe deposit box to recover stolen property. Because the evidence of extortion and grand larceny was irrefutable, the judge signed the court order within the hour. Victor coordinated directly with the Clark County Sheriff's Department. I did not need to confront Trevor in a parking lot. I did not need to engage in a shouting match over my father's legacy. I simply provided the targeting data and let the Nevada legal apparatus execute the strike. Victor dispatched a senior paralegal to the Summerlin facility to observe the operation and keep us informed. I remained at my desk monitoring the situation through the encrypted chat window. The paralegal provided a real-time text relay of the events as they unfolded. At precisely 1:00 in the afternoon, Trevor arrived at the private wealth management building. He parked his car in the reserved lot and walked through the double glass doors carrying an empty leather duffel bag. He was likely sent by Greg to retrieve the remaining watches so they could fence them through a less reputable dealer to secure emergency cash. Greg's frozen bank accounts meant they needed capital immediately just to survive the week. Trevor approached the front desk and presented the identification card for Desert Apex Holdings. He requested access to the subterranean vault. The bank manager did not offer a polite smile. He did not hand over the brass key. Instead, he pressed a button under his desk and took a step back. Two deputies from the Clark County Sheriff's Department stepped out of the adjacent manager's office holding the signed writ of replevin. The paralegal described how the arrogance drained from Trevor's face the moment he saw the uniforms. The deputies informed him that the safe deposit box registered to his shell company was currently under a civil seizure order for harboring stolen estate assets. They presented him with a copy of the court document listing the specific serial numbers of the timepieces inside. They demanded the keys to the box. Trevor did not argue. He did not attempt to call his father or threaten the officers with a lawsuit. The presence of law enforcement officers standing in a highly secure banking facility shattered his delusion of invincibility. His hands shook as he surrendered the keys to the deputies. The bank manager escorted the officers down to the vault. They opened the box and verified the contents against the trust declaration. The vintage Patek Philippe, the Vacheron Constantin, and the remaining pieces of my father's collection were all sitting securely inside. The deputies formally impounded the assets, transferring custody back to the irrevocable trust. Trevor was escorted out of the building by the bank security staff. He was not arrested on the spot because the writ was a civil seizure, but the criminal investigation for grand larceny was officially underway. He walked out into the blistering summer heat empty-handed. The paralegal sent a final message, confirming the physical assets were secure and en route to a bonded legal depository. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and exhaled a long, slow breath. The knot of tension that had lived in my stomach since I first discovered the empty winder finally unraveled. The primary objective was achieved. My father's curated legacy was no longer in jeopardy. Greg and Cynthia had lost their leverage. Their extortion attempt was neutralized because they no longer possessed the ransom they were trying to hold over me. They were bankrupt, their accounts were frozen, their stolen assets were repossessed. Yet they still had to maintain their facade. Greg had a prominent charity gala to attend that evening at the Wynn Resort. He was scheduled to give a speech to secure investors for his failing commercial real estate ventures. He still believed he could smile his way out of the collapsing architecture of his life. He did not know that his extortion text had sealed his fate. He did not know that his stepson had just surrendered the last of their stolen leverage to the sheriff's department. Greg and Cynthia thought the battle was still being fought in the shadows. They did not know that the trap was no longer just a legal maneuver. It was about to become a public reckoning. I locked my workstation and grabbed my suit jacket. The board was set and it was time to get dressed for the gala. The Wynn Las Vegas ballroom was engineered to overwhelm the senses. It was a cavernous space, constructed of imported marble cascading floral arrangements and gilded mirrors that reflected the elite attendees infinitely. Tonight, it hosted a prominent philanthropic gala. The premise of the evening was raising funds for desert conservation, but the reality of the event was entirely transactional. In this specific ecosystem, philanthropy is rarely about altruism. It is a highly publicized networking arena where failing businessmen purchase $10,000 tables to convince wealthy peers they are still solvent. Appearance is the only currency that matters in these rooms. I stepped out of the chauffeured town car and handed my coat to the valet. I did not wear sequins or heavy diamonds. I chose a floor-length midnight blue gown with clean architectural lines. My father always taught me that true power does not need to shout to be heard. I wore no jewelry except for a simple silver chain around my neck. Victor walked beside me wearing a tailored charcoal suit that projected decades of undeniable legal authority. We did not hold an invitation. We did not need one. Victor knew the event organizers and secured our entry with a quiet conversation at the registration desk. We walked through the heavy mahogany doors and entered the ballroom. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and roasted filet mignon. A string quartet played a classical arrangement in the far corner, providing a cultured soundtrack for the predators circulating the floor. I scanned the room and located them immediately. Cynthia and Greg were holding court near the center of the ballroom. Cynthia wore a vivid crimson dress designed to draw every eye in the room. She laughed brightly, lightly, touching the arm of a prominent commercial real estate developer. Greg stood beside her holding a crystal tumbler of scotch, projecting the illusion of a conquering titan. They were working the crowd, desperate to secure emergency capital before the banks opened on Monday morning and exposed their frozen accounts. They were dancing on the edge of a sheer cliff, believing they could simply float if they smiled hard enough. Cynthia noticed me first. Her practiced laughter died in her throat. The vibrant crimson fabric of her dress seemed to dull as the blood drained from her face. She leaned in and whispered something to Greg. His head snapped in my direction. For a fraction of a second, the sheer terror of his impending ruin flashed across his features. He quickly masked the panic with a tight, menacing grin and excused himself from the developer's side. He navigated through the crowd of silk gowns and tailored tuxedos, moving with rigid urgency. I did not retreat. I walked toward the back of the room where a towering champagne fountain flowed, cascading golden liquid over tiers of crystal coupes. I wanted to draw him away from the center of the room to ensure our conversation remained contained. Greg intercepted me before I could reach the perimeter. He positioned his body between me and the main crowd, using his broad shoulders to create a physical barrier. He kept his voice low, a harsh, strained whisper intended to conceal his anger from the nearby guests. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, leaning in close enough for me to smell the alcohol on his breath. "This is a closed corporate event, Gemma. You are trespassing." "I am attending a charity function," I replied, keeping my tone conversational and pleasant. "Victor and I are very passionate about community development." Greg glanced at Victor, who stood a few paces away inspecting a crystal glass with feigned interest. Greg turned his attention back to me, his jaw clenched tight. He was sweating. A thin layer of moisture gathered at his hairline, ruining his polished facade. He pulled at the collar of his dress shirt as if the room had suddenly lost its oxygen. "You think this is a game?" Greg whispered, his face turning a mottled shade of red. "You think you can just walk in here and ruin my networking event? I sent you a message this morning. I gave you a clear deadline. If you do not pull out your phone and release the block on that watch collection right now, I am making the call. I will file the elder abuse lawsuit tomorrow morning. I will personally ensure your federal security clearance is revoked before the end of the business day. You will lose your promotion. You will lose your job. You will be blacklisted in your industry." I picked up a coupe from the edge of the champagne fountain. The liquid was cold and effervescent against the glass. I took a slow sip. The flavor was crisp and sharp. "I received your message," I said, my voice steady and unbothered. It was a very detailed communication. I made sure to save a permanent digital copy. Greg narrowed his eyes, trying to read my reaction. My lack of fear confused him. Bullies rely on the predictable terror of their targets. When the target does not flinch, the bully loses their equilibrium. He assumed I was bluffing. He assumed my presence at the gala was a desperate final attempt to negotiate a surrender in public where he could not yell at me. "You are out of your depth," Greg sneered, adjusting his silk tie with a trembling hand. "You are a computer technician playing in a room full of sharks. You have no idea how the real world operates. I have investors at that table who can make or break a career with one phone call. Leave this building right now, or I will destroy your life. I am not asking you again." I looked past his shoulder. Cynthia was still standing near the center of the room, gripping her clutch purse with white knuckles. She was trying to maintain a conversation with a local politician, but her eyes kept darting toward our corner. She knew the ground beneath her feet was crumbling, but she refused to look down. They were both trapped in a delusion of their own making. They believed their social status immunized them from the consequences of their actions. "I am not leaving Greg," I said, setting the empty crystal coupe down on the linen-covered table. "I did not come here to negotiate with you. I did not come here to ask for my property back. The property is already secure." Greg frowned, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. "What are you talking about?" he asked. "Trevor is not very good at hiding things," I explained, my voice dropping to a smooth, lethal cadence. "He registered a shell company using his old apartment address. He took pictures of the holding company documents and posted them online with the geolocation tracking enabled. The Clark County Sheriff's Department seized the private vault in Summerlin 6 hours ago. They recovered the Patek Philippe and the Vacheron Constantin. The assets are currently locked in a bonded legal depository. You have nothing left to trade." The color drained from Greg's face. His mouth opened, but no sound emerged. The realization that his stolen leverage was gone struck him like a physical blow. He staggered back half a step, his polished leather shoes slipping slightly on the marble floor. He looked around the ballroom as if expecting the police to burst through the doors. "But you still sent the text message," I continued, delivering the words with surgical precision. "You still put an extortion threat in writing and transmitted it across a cellular network. You documented a federal crime to cover up a state felony. You handed me the exact cryptographic evidence I needed to end this." Greg began to breathe heavily. His chest rose and fell in rapid, jagged motions. The false bravado was gone. The titan of commercial real estate was replaced by a terrified man realizing he was standing in a trap that had already snapped shut. He looked at me with hollow eyes, grasping for a reality that no longer existed. "Why are you here then?" Greg choked out, his voice trembling. "If you have the watches, why are you at my gala?" I offered him a small, cold smile. "Because my father taught me that a ledger is not settled until the final balance is paid. I am here to deliver a gift." I stepped around him and walked back toward Victor. The string quartet transitioned into a lively classical piece. The ballroom was filled with the sound of clinking glasses and wealthy patrons celebrating their own success. Greg remained frozen by the champagne fountain, staring at my back with a blank, terrified gaze. He knew the explosion was coming, but he was entirely powerless to stop it. He had to walk back to his table and smile for the investors while waiting for the executioner to swing the blade. I took my place near the silent auction display and waited for the perfect, most visible moment to strike. The transition of this evening moved with predictable rhythm. The silent auction tables positioned along the perimeter of the ballroom began to close their bidding sheets. The wealthy patrons gravitated toward the central stage, holding their crystal champagne flutes and adjusting their tailored evening wear. The organizers dimmed the ambient lighting to focus all attention on the main podium. Greg wiped a thin layer of perspiration from his forehead and smoothed the lapels of his custom suit. He possessed a desperate need for public validation. Throughout his failing career, he always believed that if he projected an image of undeniable success, the reality of his bank accounts would somehow magically align with his lies. He thrived in these environments where superficial charm could temporarily mask a staggering lack of substance. He stepped onto the raised platform and adjusted the microphone stand as a bright spotlight illuminated his features. The low murmur of the ballroom faded into polite silence. Greg cleared his throat and offered a wide, charming smile to the audience of 300 influential investors, politicians, and local celebrities. He began his speech with practiced ease. He spoke eloquently about the rich heritage of the Las Vegas Valley and the profound responsibility of the elite class to foster community growth. His voice resonated through the state-of-the-art sound system, filling the cavernous space with hollow sentiments. He smoothly transitioned his topic toward the concept of legacy. He declared that true wealth is not measured in dollars, but in the enduring family values passed down to the next generation. He extended his hand toward the edge of the stage where Cynthia stood. She offered a serene, polished smile, looking every bit the devoted matriarch. They performed their roles flawlessly, projecting an image of unified prosperity. The investors seated in the front rows nodded in quiet approval, entirely unaware that the man speaking was currently facing impending financial ruin and a felony investigation. I stood near the silent auction tables watching the performance unfold. Victor stood beside me, maintaining his characteristic stoic posture. He checked the time on his analog watch. The timing of a legal execution in Nevada must be orchestrated with exacting precision. Serving court documents at a private residence allows the recipient to hide their shame behind closed doors. Serving them in front of their target investors forces them to confront their reality in the harsh light of public scrutiny. Victor offered a single subtle nod toward the back entrance of the ballroom. Two men dressed in dark tailored suits stepped out from the shadows near the kitchen corridors. They did not wear the recognizable uniforms of venue security, and they did not carry themselves like wealthy guests. They moved with the unmistakable rigid purpose of professional process servers. They navigated through the sea of silk gowns and expensive tuxedos without breaking their stride. Greg was mid-sentence praising the philanthropic spirit of his peers. When the two men reached the edge of the stage, they did not wait for a pause in his speech. They climbed the short steps and approached the podium with swift efficiency. The first man handed a thick manila folder directly to Greg, interrupting his grand monologue. The second man stepped over to Cynthia and placed an identical heavy folder in her hands. The first man spoke in a clear, carrying voice, stating that they were officially served by order of the Clark County Court. The string quartet had stopped playing minutes ago, leaving nothing to cover the sound of the formal legal declaration. The vast ballroom went dead silent. 300 of the most powerful people in the city stared at the stage in collective shock. The culture of Las Vegas elite circles dictates that public scandal is a contagious disease. Proximity to failure is avoided at all costs. Greg looked down at the folder in his hands. The cover page boldly displayed the charges in large black text: civil asset conversion, grand larceny, and criminal extortion. The accompanying ex parte injunction detailing the comprehensive freeze of his financial accounts was layered immediately underneath. The color drained from his face, leaving his skin a pale, sickly hue. Cynthia stared at her folder with wide, unblinking eyes, her hands trembling so fiercely the paper rustled against her crimson dress. Despite the overwhelming evidence handed to him, Greg possessed a pathological inability to accept defeat gracefully. His survival instinct demanded that he control the narrative. He grabbed the microphone, gripping the metal stand so tightly his knuckles turned white. He let out a loud, forced laugh that echoed awkwardly off the marble walls. He smiled at the audience and dismissed the interruption as a mere clerical error. He claimed it was a minor misunderstanding regarding a corporate merger and assured everyone that his legal team would resolve it in the morning. He then scanned the room and locked his eyes on me. He gestured in my direction, attempting to weaponize the sympathy of the crowd. He spoke directly into the microphone, identifying me as his confused stepdaughter. He spun a fabricated tale claiming I was going through a difficult emotional period following the loss of my father. He played the victim perfectly, asking the prominent guests for their patience and understanding while he handled private family matters. He painted himself as a patient-loving patriarch dealing with an erratic child. The crowd murmured, shifting their collective gaze toward my corner of the room. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice to defend myself against his lies. Emotional arguments are easily dismissed by people who value decorum over truth. Defeating a liar requires irrefutable proof delivered in a medium they cannot manipulate. I reached into my clutch purse and pulled out my smartphone. When I first arrived at the Wynn, I conducted a passive scan of the local wireless networks. I noticed the ballroom audio-visual system was operating on a generic, unsecured connection designed for easy access by guest speakers. It took me less than 2 minutes to bypass their basic firewall using a standard penetration protocol. I paired my device directly to the central projector array, overriding the hotel presentation software. I unlocked my screen. I did not look at Greg. I tapped the media playback icon. Above the stage, 3 towering high-definition projection screens flickered to life simultaneously. The glowing charity logo disappeared instantly. It was replaced by the interior of a familiar mahogany study. The room let out a unified gasp of surprise. Sitting behind the heavy oak desk was my father, Thomas Bennett. He looked tired from his illness, but his eyes held a sharp, piercing clarity that commanded immediate respect. The audio system amplified his voice, projecting it across the silent ballroom with undeniable authority. He spoke directly to the camera. He stated clearly that he was recording this specific declaration because he knew his wife Cynthia could not be trusted to honor his final wishes or protect his legacy. He explained to the lens that she prioritized the illusion of wealth above integrity and would likely attempt to liquidate his curated assets to fund her inevitable next marriage. Cynthia let out a stifled cry on the stage, covering her mouth with her trembling hand. The prominent developers and politicians in the front rows stared at her in utter shock. The pristine image she had spent the entire evening cultivating disintegrated in a matter of seconds. My father did not stop there. The video continued. He held up a crisp piece of paper to the camera. He explicitly named the luxury timepiece collection, detailing the vintage Patek Philippe and the Audemars Piguet. He read every single serial number aloud with slow, deliberate enunciation. He formally assigned the entire collection to an irrevocable trust placed solely in my name. He concluded the recording by stating that any attempt by Cynthia or her future associates to remove, transfer, or sell the watches constituted a direct violation of his estate and an act of outright theft. The video ended and the screens faded to black. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. The carefully constructed facade Greg and Cynthia had spent a year building shattered into thousands of irreparable pieces. The investors who had been nodding along with Greg moments earlier physically took steps away from the stage, distancing themselves from the toxic fallout. The hypocrisy of their image was laid bare in front of the exact audience they desperately needed to impress. They stood on the raised platform holding their court documents, surrounded by the deafening judgment of their peers. The visual of the projected video faded into darkness, leaving the ballroom illuminated only by the harsh stage lights. The silence stretched, holding the entire room in a collective state of suspended disbelief. Then the murmur began. It started as a low hum of whispers among the tables near the back, and quickly swelled into a wave of unfiltered judgment. In Las Vegas, reputation is a fragile construct built on mutual assurance. When the foundation crumbles, the collapse is instantaneous. Cynthia was the first to break the silence. The polished veneer she had maintained for her entire adult life fractured, exposing the raw, desperate entitlement underneath. She dropped the heavy manila folder on the stage, sending the legal documents spilling across the polished floorboards. She pointed a trembling finger in my direction. Her face contoured into an expression of sheer fury. She screamed that I was an ungrateful child. Her voice cracked, echoing through the microphone Greg still clutched in his hand. She yelled that she had given up the best years of her life to care for my father, and that she was owed every cent he left behind. She demanded that security throw me out of the building. She expected the crowd to rally to her defense. She expected the wealthy patrons to sympathize with a grieving widow facing a rebellious daughter. Instead, the opposite occurred. The prominent real estate developer standing near the front row slowly set his champagne flute down on a passing waiter's tray. He did not say a word to Cynthia. He simply turned his back to the stage and walked toward the exit. The woman standing next to him, a major political donor, followed suit. The disgust in the room was a tangible force pushing the elite attendees away from the center of the ballroom. Cynthia watched them leave. Her mouth opened, but she could not find the words to stop the exodus. The social currency she had spent a year accumulating evaporated into thin air. She was no longer a high society matriarch. She was a documented thief, caught raiding an estate on a high-definition projection screen. Greg stood frozen beside her. The thick legal folder felt like lead in his hands. He looked down at the charges listed on the cover page. The extortion threat he sent me that morning was intended to be his ultimate leverage. He thought he could use my career against me. But standing in front of 300 estranged investors facing an ex parte injunction that froze every dollar he possessed, the reality of his situation finally breached his arrogance. A text message threatening elder abuse holds no power when the sender is simultaneously being served with a civil suit for grand larceny in front of the entire city. The sheer volume of his documented crimes neutralized his only weapon. He was bankrupt, exposed, and legally cornered. He stepped off the podium and moved toward the cluster of investors sitting at his sponsored table. He held his hands up in a placating gesture, trying to salvage the deals that were supposed to save his commercial empire. He called out to the lead investor, insisting that they could still secure the stadium lot if they finalized the escrow tomorrow. The investor did not even look Greg in the eye. He reached for his suit jacket draped over the back of his chair. The investor stated quietly that his firm does not conduct business with individuals under active felony investigation. He instructed his associates to gather their belongings. Greg reached out to touch the investor's arm, a desperate plea for a second chance. The investor swatted Greg's hand away with a look of profound revulsion. The isolation was immediate and brutal. Greg was left standing alone in a sea of empty chairs. While Greg and Cynthia faced their social execution, Trevor attempted to initiate his own survival protocol. He had been hovering near the dessert station when the video played. The moment he heard my father recite the serial numbers of the watches, he realized the magnitude of his exposure. He knew the Clark County Sheriff's Department had already seized the private vault in Summerlin. He knew the pawnshop broker had flagged him attempting to fence the Audemars Piguet. The net was drawing tight. Trevor set his drink down and took a cautious step backward. He kept his head lowered, hoping the chaotic atmosphere near the stage would mask his retreat. He turned and walked briskly toward the service corridor, located behind the kitchen doors. He intended to slip out through the loading dock and disappear into the night before the authorities could process the civil suit into a criminal warrant. He severely underestimated the meticulous planning that governed this operation. Victor never left a tactical blind spot unattended. When we first entered the ballroom, Victor had a quiet conversation with the director of venue security. He provided them with a copy of the pending felony complaint and the court-ordered asset freeze. Wynn Security does not tolerate active fugitives treating their property as an escape route. As Trevor pushed through the swinging kitchen doors, his path was immediately blocked. Two broad-shouldered security supervisors stepped out from the prep area. They wore earpieces and maintained a calm, immovable presence. They informed Trevor that the authorities had requested he remain on the premises to answer questions regarding the attempted sale of stolen goods on the Strip. Trevor tried to argue, claiming he was a paying guest and possessed the right to leave. The security supervisors did not debate the legal nuances. They simply crossed their arms and stood their ground, forming an impenetrable human wall. Trevor looked back over his shoulder, trapped between the kitchen staff and the glaring lights of the ballroom. His shoulders slumped. The arrogant smirk that defined his entire existence melted into a grimace of pure defeat. He realized his father could not save him, and his stepmother had no money left to hire a defense attorney. The antagonists were systematically stripped of their wealth, their reputation, and their freedom in a matter of minutes. The architecture of their lives collapsed under the weight of their own greed. I stood near the silent auction display watching the ruins smolder. I did not feel the urge to gloat. Gloating implies a competition, and this was never a competition. It was a pest control operation. The perimeter was secure, and the intruders were neutralized. I walked across the marble floor, closing the distance between the perimeter and the stage. The crowd parted for me, stepping aside with a newfound respect. I was no longer the quiet, submissive daughter they had dismissed earlier in the evening. I was the architect of the snare that had just decimated a fraudulent empire. Cynthia remained on the stage, kneeling to gather the scattered pages of the court documents. Her hands shook uncontrollably. Her crimson dress dragged across the polished wood. She looked up as I approached. The fury in her eyes had been replaced by a vacant, desperate terror. She realized I was the only person left in the room who possessed the capital to save her. She reached her hand out toward me, tears streaming down her carefully contoured face. She begged me to withdraw the civil suit. She promised to leave Greg and file for divorce in the morning. She swore she never meant to hurt me and that she was just misguided by a terrible man. She offered to return to the way things used to be before my father died. I stood over her, looking down at the woman who had spent my entire life evaluating my worth based on a balance sheet. I remembered the cold afternoon on the country club patio when she mocked my career and praised Trevor's stolen watch. I remembered the years she spent pretending to love a man she only viewed as an automated teller machine. I did not offer my hand to help her up. I kept my posture straight and my expression neutral. I looked directly into her eyes, stripping away any lingering illusion that a reconciliation was possible. "Dad knew exactly who you were," I said, my voice low, clear, and carrying the finality of a closing vault door. "And now so does everyone else." I turned my back on her and walked away. I did not pause to watch her reaction. I walked past Greg, who was staring blankly at an empty table. I walked past the murmuring crowds of investors who were busy erasing Greg's contact information from their phones. Victor fell into step beside me, adjusting his suit jacket with a satisfied nod. We pushed through the heavy mahogany doors and exited the ballroom, leaving them in the silent, suffocating ruins of their own making. The Nevada desert air waited outside, warm and expansive, offering a clean slate. The ledger was finally settled. The dust settled over the Las Vegas Valley with a cold, satisfying peace. The legal machinery of Nevada moves with ruthless efficiency when fueled by cryptographic evidence and public humiliation. Greg did not possess the stamina or the capital for a protracted court battle. When the district attorney presented the metadata from his text message alongside the signed pawnshop receipt, he crumbled. He accepted a plea deal to avoid a lengthy prison sentence. The terms of the agreement mandated full restitution to the estate and the forfeiture of his remaining liquid assets. The banks foreclosed on his commercial properties. The creditors dismantled his holding companies piece by piece. He traded his custom-tailored suits for a public defender's advice and a studio apartment on the fringes of the city. His extortion attempt achieved the exact reverse of its intended goal. It stripped him of his wealth and left him a bankrupt hollow shell of a man staring at empty ledgers. Cynthia discovered that high society loyalty is entirely conditional. The moment the projector screens went dark, at the win, her social currency vanished into the desert air. The country club quietly revoked her membership, citing a violation of their ethical conduct clauses. The women who used to attend her lavish brunch dates suddenly stopped returning her calls. She became radioactive. She was a documented thief, isolated in a city that worships the illusion of perfection but punishes public embarrassment. 3 months after the gala, my phone screen illuminated with her name. I let the call route to the automated answering service. The resulting voicemail was a jarring departure from her usual polished tone. She sounded fragile and exhausted. She pleaded for a reconciliation loan, claiming she was facing eviction and needed family support to survive the winter. She promised to repay every cent. She used the word love 3 times in a span of 40 seconds. I did not delete the message. I did not call her back. I exported the audio file and forwarded it directly to Victor with instructions to add it to the ongoing civil protection file. You cannot negotiate with a parasite. You can only sever the connection. Trevor faced a similarly bleak reality adjustment. The district attorney factored his age and lack of prior felony convictions into his sentencing, but they did not let him walk away untouched. He pleaded guilty to attempted commercial fraud. The presiding judge handed down a strict probationary period and mandated heavy monthly restitution payments to cover the legal fees incurred by the estate trust. His leased BMW was repossessed by the dealership, leaving him without transportation. To meet his court obligations, he secured employment far outside the realm of commercial real estate. He took a position as a valet attendant at a mid-tier casino located miles away from the glamour of the Strip. He spends his days parking the exact luxury vehicles he used to pretend he owned. He works for minimum wage plus tips in the sweltering Nevada heat wearing a polyester uniform. The universe has a distinct way of correcting unearned arrogance. I secured a private holding unit at a high-security depository in Henderson. The facility operates under biometric access protocols and continuous armed surveillance. It is a sterile, quiet environment built to protect tangible assets from unpredictable human behavior. I brought the mahogany watch window into the climate-controlled vault. I carefully placed the vintage Patek Philippe, the Vacheron Constantin, and the rest of my father's collection back into their velvet-lined slots. I pressed the brass button and watched the motors spin to life, initiating the slow, precise rotation. The heartbeat of his legacy was restored. But I did not leave the Rolex Daytona in the case. I picked up the heavy steel timepiece and ran my thumb over the faint scratch near the 12 o'clock marker. The mark of hard work. I unclasped the steel band and fastened it around my own wrist. The metal was cool against my skin. It carried the weight of history and the undeniable proof of survival. I adjusted my shirt cuff, allowing the bezel to rest discreetly out of sight. I did not need to flash the hardware to prove my worth. I knew exactly what I possessed. I drove to the corporate campus wearing the Rolex. The Human Resources Department finalized my background investigation that very morning. The federal investigators reviewed the extortion attempt and the resulting court judgments. They did not see a liability. They saw a candidate who mitigated a severe security threat using logic, documentation, and legal protocol rather than emotional compromise. They noted my incorruptibility in the face of blackmail. My top secret clearance was approved without a single delay. The promotion to senior systems architect became official by the end of the day. I moved into a corner office with a view of the distant mountains. I built my career the exact same way I dismantled my adversaries, by relying on data structure and unyielding boundaries. The entire ordeal provided a profound education on the nature of family. Society dictates that blood ties demand unconditional loyalty. We are taught to forgive the people who share our genetics regardless of the damage they inflict. But blood is just a biological coincidence. True loyalty is a conscious choice. It is earned through mutual respect and consistent protection. My father protected me long after his heart stopped beating by leaving a digital and legal fortress for me to inherit. He chose to defend my future when he realized the woman he married would try to dismantle it. I decided to honor that choice by extending the protection to others. I partnered with Victor to establish a philanthropic foundation in my father's name. We funded a comprehensive scholarship program dedicated to young women in Nevada who lack the financial resources to pursue degrees in cybersecurity and engineering. The grant provides tuition assistance and legal advocacy for students facing domestic financial abuse. I structured the foundation as an irrevocable trust, ensuring the capital can never be redirected, compromised, or leveraged by outside parties. The paperwork was drafted with the same surgical precision Victor used to secure my inheritance. We created a permanent shield for women who need a quiet, safe place to learn how to build their own firewalls. My mother attempted to teach me that love is a ledger designed to extract value from the vulnerable. I rewrote the accounting. My father's true legacy is no longer confined to a mahogany box hidden in a study. It is a living, breathing mechanism of education and resilience. It is the steady hum of a server rack and the sharp minds of the women learning to defend their own perimeters. I sit at my desk, watch the second hand sweep across the dial of the Daytona and smile. The desert outside is harsh and unforgiving, but the perimeter is secure. The ledger is settled and the quiet triumph belongs entirely to me.
A family is meant to be a sanctuary. It is the first architecture we know, and the foundation upon which we build our understanding of the world. Yet in the relentless pursuit of status that defines so much of modern American culture, that sanctuary is too often hollowed out and replaced by a balance sheet. When we look at the neon-soaked landscape of cities like Las Vegas, where image is the recognized currency, we see a reflection of a deeper crisis in parenting. The story of Gemma and the stolen watch collection is not merely a tale of legal retribution or a satisfying downfall. It serves as a profound mirror reflecting the exact moments where parental guidance falters and the fragile ecosystem of a traditional family collapses under the weight of vanity. When we strip away the mahogany windows and the luxury timepieces, we are left with a stark examination of what we are truly handing down to the next generation. The most dangerous mistake a parent can make is treating affection as a transactional currency. In many households, children are subtly weighed on a scale of utility. A mother like Cynthia does not view a child as a soul to be nurtured or a mind to be guided. She views them as an extension of her own social ambition, an asset to be leveraged, or a liability to be ignored. When we raise children in an environment where their worth is calculated by how well they project an illusion of success, we rob them of their humanity. The core of a healthy traditional family structure relies on honesty, fairness, and unconditional support. If love comes with an invoice, the relationship fractures the moment the payment is due. The greatest inheritance a parent can leave behind is not a sprawling estate or a vintage Rolex. It is the quiet, unshakable foundation of integrity. When parents live a life of deception, prioritizing the appearance of wealth over the reality of character, they plant the seeds of their own eventual isolation. Blood ties mean very little when the veins are pumped full of pragmatism and deceit. We owe our children the truth of who we are, even when that truth is imperfect. We must also examine the illusion of vanity that traps so many young minds today. Consider the tragic trajectory of a boy like Trevor. He was handed stolen luxury to mask his own profound inadequacies. There is a deep tragic ignorance in believing that a tailored suit or a high-end watch can shield you from the consequences of your own incompetence. Parents who dress their children in unearned armor are sending them into the world entirely defenseless. True wisdom lies in the ability to see through these glittering mirages. Gemma embodies this clarity. When faced with a staggering betrayal, she did not let the fire of resentment dictate her actions. She practiced a profound emotional stillness. In raising children, we must prioritize this exact type of emotional awareness. We need to teach them how to stand in the center of a storm without becoming the wind. Instead of reacting with impulsive outbursts, they must learn to observe, to apply logic, and to establish firm, unyielding boundaries. A mind that cannot be provoked is a mind that cannot be controlled. Teaching a child to master their own emotional responses is equipping them with a shield that no amount of money can buy. This brings us to the crucial element of resilience. Independence is the wellspring of true freedom. When a parent indulges a child attempting to buy their confidence with stolen shortcuts or unearned privileges, they are quietly destroying that child's capacity to survive. Cynthia thought she was giving her new stepson a seat at the adult table. In reality, she was tying a heavy anchor around his neck. A young adult who relies on the facade created by others will inevitably break the moment the real world asks them to stand on their own 2 feet. Our duty as guides is to hand our children the tools to weather the inevitable hardships of life. We must teach them the discipline of the long hours, the quiet dignity of self-reliance, and the strength to build their own metaphorical firewalls. A child forged in the quiet furnace of their own genuine effort will never cower when adversity knocks on the door. They will simply evaluate the threat and secure the perimeter. They will know their own worth because they built it themselves, stone by stone. The unraveling of Cynthia and Greg serves as a vivid illustration of the universal law of cause and effect. Their ruin was not orchestrated by a vindictive daughter holding a grudge. They were devoured by the very trap they spent their entire lives designing. The deception they relied upon to navigate their elite social circles eventually became the cage that held them. As parents, we are the primary architects of the reality our children will inherit. If we build our homes on a foundation of lies, we cannot act surprised when the roof eventually caves in. We must model the behavior we wish to see, recognizing that every single action ripples outward, shaping the moral compass of the lives entrusted to our care. The world is an unforgiving place for those who try to cheat the ledger of consequence. Integrity is the only investment that yields a guaranteed return. If you find value in exploring the complex architecture of human nature and the quiet justice that follows those who stand their ground, you belong here with us. Take a moment to follow the channel Orange Vengeance, where we continue to unravel the intricate layers of family loyalty, the weight of our decisions, and the unavoidable consequences of our choices. We spend our entire lives trying to leave a lasting mark on the world, unaware that our most permanent signature is written on the minds of those we raise. The luxury timepieces will eventually stop ticking, the wealth will fade into the background, and the social standing we guard so fiercely will be forgotten by the next passing generation. What remains is the silent truth of who we were when the doors were closed and the cameras were off. Look closely at the faces sitting across your own dinner table tonight. Notice the unspoken expectations, the subtle glances, and the quiet spaces lingering between the words. You might find yourself wondering who is actually holding the ledger in your house, and whether the invisible debts you are accumulating right now are ones you can truly afford to pay when the final balance comes due.